If you choose one habit in your 50s that seems harmless, you may condemn your later years to loneliness. Most people think small compromises cost little. They do not see how tiny choices become the quiet architects of suffering. 95% of the regrets you will carry in old age begin as an easy yes, a swallowed complaint, a skipped visit, a conversation postponed. Imagine decades of unspoken resentments and missed chances accumulating like dust in an empty room, until one day the room is all you have left. This is not melodrama, it is a warning. A single pattern repeated in silence will determine whether your final chapter is gentle and full or hollow and full of what-ifs. Today, I want to share with you why the quiet choices we make in later life matter far more than we realize. At an older age, people often believe that peace comes naturally, that after decades of working and sacrificing, life will finally soften. But the truth is simpler and harsher. Peace does not arrive on its own. It is shaped by the way we think, the boundaries we set, and the habits we allow to remain. What seems small in your 60s becomes decisive in your 70s. What you tolerate now becomes the weight you must carry later. There are stories I have witnessed, ordinary stories of neighbors, relatives, and elders whose lives changed not because of dramatic events, but because of a silent pattern repeated year after year. These stories are not meant to frighten you, but to prepare you, to help you see how easily one decision can lead a person toward exhaustion or toward freedom. Growing old is not only about age, it is about understanding what truly protects your spirit. And today, I want to walk you through the moments that reveal this truth most clearly. There was an old man named Lam, 74 years old, living in a quiet neighborhood at the edge of the city. His wife had passed away years earlier, and his only son lived abroad, calling once every few weeks when work allowed. On the surface, Lam looked like the kind of elder people admired, gentle, hardworking, and endlessly willing to help. Neighbors often said he had a good heart, the kind that never refused anyone, and for most of his life, that had been true. But as he grew older, the kindness that once made him love slowly turned into a burden he could no longer carry. Lum lived alone in a small house with a garden he tended every morning. His legs ached more now, and his eyesight dimmed in the evenings. Yet whenever someone knocked on his door asking for something, to fix a chair, to watch their dog, to help sign documents they didn't understand, he could not bring himself to say no. He had spent so many years being dependable that the thought of disappointing someone felt unbearable. Even when he was tired, even when the task pained him physically, he forced a smile and said he was fine. One afternoon, his neighbor Mai asked him to help move several heavy boxes from her storage room. She apologized, saying she had no one else around. Lum hesitated for a second. His back had been hurting for days. But then he nodded, convincing himself it was only a small favor. As he lifted the first box, a sharp pain shot through his lower spine, but he kept going. Just a few more, he told himself. I can rest later. By the end of the task, sweat soaked through his shirt, and he could barely straighten his back. Still, he insisted to Mai that everything was all right. That night, he collapsed onto his bed, unable to move without wincing. The pain lingered for days, then weeks. He stopped tending the garden. He struggled to cook simple meals. Even walking to the market became exhausting. But what hurt him more was not the physical injury. It was the quiet realization that no one truly understood how fragile he had become. The neighbors he helped continued to ask for favors. They assumed his polite smile meant he was strong as ever. And because he had never learned to speak up, they had no reason to think otherwise. One morning, his son called from overseas. Hearing his father's strained voice, he asked if something was wrong. Reflexively, Lum said he was fine. Only after the call ended did he sit in silence, staring at the empty chair across from him. A strange loneliness settled over him, one deeper than anything he had felt before. It wasn't just that he lived alone. It was that he had spent a lifetime hiding his needs so well that no one could see him anymore. As weeks passed, his condition worsened. He avoided going outside, Afraid people would ask for help he could no longer give. He turned off his phone at times, embarrassed by his own weakness. His world shrank to the four walls of his home, and the garden he once loved withered slowly under the sun. One evening, while sitting on the edge of his bed, he whispered to himself a thought he had never dared to admit. I was so afraid of letting others down that I forgot how to take care of myself. The realization hit him like a quiet storm, not loud, but devastating. All those years of trying to be useful, trying to be agreeable, had built a habit he could not break. And now, at the age when he needed support the most, he found that he had no one to lean on. Not because people were unkind, but because he had trained them to believe he needed nothing. The tragedy was not that others failed him. The tragedy was that he had erased his own needs to the point of invisibility. And this, he understood now, was the cost of a lifetime spent avoiding the smallest word he had never learned to say. No. From Mr. Lam's story, one truth becomes painfully clear. When you always choose to endure in silence, people stop noticing your struggles. Kindness without boundaries is not compassion. It is self-neglect disguised as virtue. In old age, the cost of pleasing others is far heavier than in youth, because every mistake is paid for with your health, your loneliness, and the little strength you still have left. The lesson is simple but vital. If something hurts, say so. If you are tired, rest. If you cannot do something, refuse gently. Peace in later life begins with the courage to protect your own well-being, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Silence may keep you polite, but it will not keep you safe. There was an elderly woman named Anne, 68 years old, who lived with her youngest daughter in a modest apartment near the river. Unlike many elders her age, Anne was not physically weak. She still walked with steady steps, cooked her own meals, and kept her mind sharp by reading every evening. What troubled her was something far less visible, a deep fear of being forgotten. Her husband had passed away early, and her two older children had families of their own, visiting only on holidays. Her youngest daughter, Lynn, worked long hours at a local company. To Anne, the apartment often felt like a waiting room where she sat quietly, hoping someone would need her, speak to her, or simply notice her presence. She did not complain. After all, she believed this was just how modern life worked. But beneath her calm demeanor lay a silent longing, the desire to feel important, useful, irreplaceable to someone. One day, Lynn brought home her boyfriend, a polite young man named Koa. He greeted Anne with respect, listened to her stories, and even helped her carry groceries upstairs. For the first time in years, Anne felt a warm spark in her chest, a sense that her world might expand beyond the narrow routine she had grown accustomed to. Whenever Koa visited, she prepared tea, arranged the living room neatly, and tried her best to create a welcoming space. His presence made the apartment feel fuller, the evenings less lonely. As months passed, Lynn and Koa became serious about their future. They discussed marriage, saving for a house, and planning a life together. Anne was genuinely happy for her daughter, yet a quiet fear crept into her heart. What would happen to her once they married? Would they move away? Would the house feel even emptier than before? The thought terrified her. She tried to push it aside, but fear has a way of whispering louder at night, when everything else is silent. One weekend, Lynn and Koa told her they would spend the holiday with Koa's family in another province. They would be gone for 4 days, and smile faintly and wish them a good trip. But once the door closed, she felt the apartment echo in a way it never had. She walked around the room slowly, noticing how quiet the walls were, how the light from the window seemed colder. For the first time, she realized just how dependent she had become on the small comfort of having someone nearby, even if they barely spoke. On the second night alone, she began to feel an ache in her chest, a heaviness she couldn't describe. She tried to distract herself with television, but the noise only reminded her of how empty the room was. She sat on the balcony, watching people walk by below, families chatting, children laughing, couples holding hands. Each sound carried a reminder of what she lacked. She felt old, invisible, unnecessary, as though life had moved forward, leaving her behind. When Lynn returned, she immediately noticed something different about her mother. The apartment was clean, the meals prepared, but Anne's eyes looked distant, as if she had traveled somewhere far and returned with a sadness she could not shake off. When Lynn asked if something had happened, her mother smiled gently and said she was fine. But the truth lingered silently in the room. She was not fine. She was frightened. Over the next weeks, Anne grew increasingly sensitive. When Lynn came home late, she felt abandoned. When she saw her daughter laughing on the phone with Koa, she felt replaced. When they discussed moving to a new apartment after marriage, she heard only one message: there may not be space for you. She never said these fears aloud. She was afraid of appearing selfish. But suppressing them made everything worse. The more she tried to hide her sadness, the more it twisted into resentment. One evening, Lynn found her mother sitting alone in the dark, staring at the wall. When she asked gently what was wrong, Anne finally broke down. Tears fell as she whispered, "I know you will have your own life, but I am scared of being left alone. I don't know what I will do when you no longer live here." The confession stunned Lynn. She had never imagined her mother felt this way. She embraced her tightly, promising she would always be part of her life, that she would never abandon her. But the tension remained. It was not a matter of promise, it was a matter of emotional truth, and had lived so quietly, so dependently on tiny moments of company, that she had unknowingly built her happiness on something fragile, the presence of another person. As months passed, Anne's emotional dependence deepened until it became the center of her world. Every plan Lynn made, every decision she took, every moment she spent with Koa felt like a threat to Anne's sense of belonging. It strained their relationship, creating guilt in Lynn and silent pain in Anne. Eventually, the once warm home grew heavy with unspoken emotions. The tragedy of Anne's life was not loneliness itself. It was that she never learned to build a life that belonged to her. A life filled with her own interests, friends, routines, and joys. Without realizing it, she had handed her happiness entirely to others, and now she lived in fear that they would take it away. Mrs. Ann's story reveals a different kind of burden, one that is quiet, emotional, and far more common than people admit. When your happiness depends entirely on the presence or attention of someone else, life becomes fragile. Even the smallest change in another person's routine feels like abandonment. And in old age, this emotional dependence can turn ordinary days into long shadows of fear. The truth is that no matter how much your children love you, they cannot live your life for you. Their affection is real, but their world is wide. If you tie your sense of purpose to their schedule, their relationships, or their choices, you will suffer every time life pulls them in a new direction. The wiser path is to build your own routines, friendships, and small joys, not to replace your children, but to stand firmly beside them. Independence is not selfishness. It is a gift you give yourself and a relief you give to those who care about you. There comes a moment in life when the noise fades and a quiet truth stands before you. Time is never as patient as we imagine. We spend our younger years believing we can postpone honesty, postpone care, postpone the courage to live as we should. But aging teaches a harsher wisdom, that every postponed choice becomes a burden carried later. What hurts most in old age is not what life took away, but what we abandoned through hesitation. If you still have the strength to change, even a little, then you are luckier than you think. Use that strength now, before it too slips into memory. In the end, the weight of an entire life is decided not by grand victories, but by the quiet choices we make when no one is watching. If you have listened this far, then perhaps a part of you already senses the truth. Growing older is not the loss of youth, but the unveiling of what truly matters. You cannot rewrite your past, yet you can shape the days still waiting for you. Begin by speaking honestly, caring wisely, and living with a steadiness that protects your heart instead of exhausting it. And if these reflections help you see your own journey more clearly, then stay with us. There are more timeless lessons ahead, waiting to be uncovered, one story at a time.